listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Netflix first hit Australia a decade ago, and despite rising competition, it is still our most popular streaming service. But how exactly has it managed to pull that off and continue setting the agenda time and time again?
About 2/3 of the time, the titles in that top 10 list are Netflix originals and titles that are new to the service. So we're really seeing just this kind of hype machine.
That's coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Friday, the 11th of April.
Morning, Tara, and morning to you listening wherever you are, at home, on the train, or just, enjoying a little holiday. Happy Friday. Kicking off headlines with a bit of a shocking one this morning, Tara. Peter Dutton was allegedly the target of a terror plot by a Queensland schoolboy, which involved the use of a drone. According to The Australian, the 16-year-old was committed to stand trial yesterday, where he didn't enter a plea.
Yeah, look, and he was arrested and charged over the alleged planned attack on the opposition leader's home north of Brisbane back in August 2023. And the teen, who attends a private school in Brisbane, was charged with committing acts in preparation for or planning a terror attack, testing homemade explosives and purchasing materials to make explosives. And if he's found guilty, he could face a life sentence.
The Governor of the Reserve Bank has poured cold water over hopes for significant rate cuts next month, asking Australians for patience as they try and navigate one of the most chaotic weeks in the global economy in generations. On the back end of Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, there'd been calls for the RBA to meet ahead of its May meeting to cut interest rates, with economists predicting 2 cuts by the end of the year. On a mortgage of $600,000, those cuts would have reduced monthly repayments by almost $500.
But after Trump announced his 90-day pause yesterday, which saw Wall Street surge and other markets, including the ASX, improve, a smaller rate cut is now expected. CBA, Westpac and ANZ are now predicting a 0.25 cut in May might be on the horizon, which on that $600K mortgage would see repayments drop by about $90 a month. Now, it's important to note this morning that Wall Street is down compared to yesterday's surge, and we'll have to wait and see how the Aussie market opens this morning.
In what's believed to be an Australian first, an IVF mix-up has seen a Queensland woman give birth to someone else's child. Monash IVF has apologised for mistakenly implanting a different patient's embryo into the woman who was receiving treatment in Brisbane. The company becoming aware of the incident in February after the parents requested to move their remaining frozen embryos to another provider.
Yeah, and the fertility company says it is confident that this is an isolated incident that happened due to human error, with both families now considering legal action, Chris. And legal experts have said it's not clear how the courts would actually decide who the child belongs to, as an incident like this hasn't occurred before.
Yeah, it's almost like a real-life Jane the Virgin, which is a series that when I watched at the time was like, oh, there's no way, there's absolutely no way this can happen. And now seeing that it has happened and in Australia is terrifying, Tara.
Yeah, and look, I hate to say it, but it's not actually that far-fetched a thing that could happen. Unfortunately, something I learnt recently is that the fertility industry in Australia is honestly a bit like the Wild West. There's not a lot of regulation and there are a lot of issues. And in really bizarre timing, the reason I know this is there's actually a whole new podcast series coming out on Listener on Monday called Secrets We Keep by Any Means, which is all about this kind of stuff and the fertility industry in Australia.
Sticking with all things medicine, a world-first trial involving magic mushrooms will be used to treat Melbourne patients with eating disorders. Scientists from Swinburne Uni are hopeful the psychedelic drug, which will be delivered through an IV drip, can help treat binge eating, which is the second most common eating disorder, by breaking that cycle of what they're calling negative thoughts.
Yeah, and they're saying it'll take just 15 minutes for the psychedelic to take effect, and the treatment would be over within a couple of hours. Now, it remains in its very early stages, with the trial being the first to involve a small sample size of actual patients following a successful trial last year with healthy volunteers. Now, the use of psychedelics in psychiatry is a growing field, but it's obviously not one that hasn't come without controversy. Back in 2023, Australia became the first country in the world under very strict conditions to allow psychiatrists to prescribe medicines containing psychedelics like MDMA, magic mushrooms for PTSD, and for types of treatment-resistant depression, which I've talked about before because I interviewed one of the men who had a really strong form of this, and he actually found a type of ketamine treatment that was also a trial very, very helpful. Now, the decision by the TGA was met with some mixed reactions from the medical community, while there's others that are saying this is a really positive step, anything that might help people that are going through this. Now, we've actually got a two-parter deep dive that looked into this exact topic, talking to the medical experts as well as a patient who actually underwent MDMA therapy to treat her PTSD.
Taking these tablets, doing the MDMA, was like a high-pressure cleaner that just removed all of that built up trauma and left me with who I always was.
That's pretty incredible. So, if you get results like that, I think that any kind of advancement and looking into this space is a good thing. But if you want to listen to that ep, a link will be in the show notes.
If the Weather Bureau's forecast are right, we're in for one of our warmest winters on record. The latest seasonal outlook is pointing to yet another year of unseasonably high temps, a poor snow season, and likely below average rainfall. If the forecasts are correct, it would be the third consecutive year of record warmer winters for this country, which, Tara Cassidy, I see you wearing a puffer jacket in Brisbane this morning. I believe this is news that perhaps you are welcoming.
100%. I am such a sook when it comes to the weather. I hate winter. But look, I have actually done a lot of interviews with BOM in recent years on this kind of topic. And one thing when we ask them why we're kind of seeing these records continuously, every week, it's like we've broken a new record and constantly seeing stuff about like more severe weather. Every single time, which I know people would have heard about, they go and point to this rising sea temperatures and climate change. And they actually said, and they admitted in these interviews that I'd done with them, that this change in kind of weather patterns and climate change was actually making it harder for forecasters to accurately predict and do so in a really timely fashion. So it's actually starting to impact the way they do their work, which was really interesting.
And let's go somewhere that we love to go in these headlines, to the US, but for better reasons than what we have been in the last few weeks. This one is for the sideline parents and soccer mums and dads out there. A pair of disgruntled parents in the US are threatening legal action after their 12-year-old didn't win a regional spelling bee over a technicality. The girl misspelled a word that wasn't on a predetermined list, and now her parents have sought legal advice saying she was unfairly disqualified from the competition. They're arguing she would have won had there not been a miscommunication over what could occur in a tiebreaker and what words could be used. The spelling bee chief executive, there's a chief executive says the contest is about more than spelling, but also about sportsmanship, resilience, preparation, and luck. Oh, wow.
Oh, my gosh. Which, I mean, these parents are just displaying, aren't they? Look, I didn't even realise that they're given a predetermined list. Am I behind? Like, I just thought, I feel like that's cheating. They just memorise a list. Like, no offence to anyone listening who was the spelling bee king or queen in school, but I just always thought that they were so impressive because they'd been, like, practising random words from a dictionary their whole life, not given a list of 150 words and then memorising them and throwing a fit if they got a word that wasn't on that list. Like, what?
Yeah, look, and as someone who has partaken in spelling bees, I don't want to out myself as a nerdy nerd here, but I never got a predetermined list. It was always like, to your point, it was like sit there with the dictionary and practice. So look, a predetermined list, I don't know, maybe we're in the wrong country because if this is how they're running stuff in the States, much better. Great prospects of winning.
It sounds so like hectic and legit. We've already got issues of like screaming soccer moms on the sidelines here in Australia. We've got, viral videos of where they've erected signs at like kids' competitions saying that this is a child's competition and not the A-League or NRL. I feel like they need to adopt that in the US so they're spelling bees.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's one of my favourite stories this week, and what a great way to close out another week of headlines. Thank you so much, Tara, for another cracking week. And to you listening, we love having you here every morning. Coming up next for you is Helen Smith's deep dive, looking into Netflix in Australia. It's been here for 10 years, and she'll be unpacking its cultural significance, but also all the cheeky ways it keeps us coming back for more.
Hey, it's Helen Smith here with this episode of The Briefing. It's hard to believe it's only been 10 years since Netflix started operating here in Australia. The streaming service has cemented its place in setting the agenda for global conversations around social issues and changing the way we consume movies and TV shows forever. But how does content make it onto a platform like Netflix and become the chosen one, being featured on top 10 lists and in turn getting millions of streams? And while some people praise the platform for getting Australian content onto the global stage, others say more needs to be done around regulation and funding. Netflix is also at the heart of the streaming wars in Australia, with its latest competition, Max by Warner Brothers Discovery, launching in the last couple of weeks. Dr Alexa Scarlata is a lecturer in digital communication at RMIT. Alexa, can you take us back to 2015? What was Australia's first reaction to Netflix?
I feel simultaneously like yesterday and a million years ago, but I would describe it as probably relief. Australians were pretty familiar with Netflix. It had already established quite a reputation for itself. Foxtel had licensed a few of its shows like House of Cards and Orange is the New Black. And 200,000 Australians were already using US postcodes like 90210 and VPNs to circumvent geo-blocks and pay for the American service from Australia. So Australians really wanted Netflix. They were ready for it. They were really kind of excited for it. And I think a million Australians were using it within just 6 months.
Yeah, and 10 years on, Netflix is still the most popular streaming service we have here. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, Netflix has retained its top position for a decade, which is incredible when you consider that Prime Video has entered the market and really raced up the charts, if you will. Disney Plus arrived in 2019 and we all thought, oh, here we go, some real competition for Netflix. But Netflix has retained that top position. I think it's maintained its place because it arrived fully formed and it's kind of set the expectation for what a user-friendly streaming service and a catalogue and interface should look like. In 2020, a market research firm from the US, Ampere Analysis, identified Australia as the most highly penetrated Netflix market in the world. So we love it even more than the US. And it remains the most popular SVOD in Australia, having been used by 67% of Australian adults in the first half of last year.
And we've seen competition enter the space, some fail, some hold. Why do you think no one can compete with it? Is it just that user-friendly platform we're used to, or the branding of Netflix? You know, we've had phrases like Netflix and chill. It's really become part of our zeitgeist.
When you say streaming, you think Netflix. It's kind of the Kleenex of the landscape, I suppose. We've definitely seen some failures along the way, which many people kind of forget about. You know, Seven and Foxtel partnered on Presto in 2014, and QuickFlix was kicking around since 2011. But it was when Netflix arrived in 2015 that a lot of Australians, young and old, kind of started to understand what streaming was and what it could do. I would also say that it's maintained its position because it's produced those kind of cultural touchstones, watershed, water cooler conversation titles, like Bridgerton and recently Adolescence, that are kind of quite unique in their prestige and their spend, their kind of high-end quality. But of course, they've also, diversified into reality TV and increasingly into sport now too. So they're doing a bit of everything and they're doing it first. So they're setting the pace.
And you mentioned there some of the setting the agenda that Netflix does for global conversations around social issues. How do they do that so well? How are they choosing these shows, or how are these shows being platformed that then, like Adolescence, or I'm thinking 13 Reasons Why, or even Sex Education, these shows that really just go global and spark important social issues?
When Netflix arrived in Australia, the rhetoric that they used was, we are eager to tell Australian stories to the world. So what I think they've done a really good job with shows like Squid Game and Lupin, which is a French series, and even Heartbreak High, taking Australia to the world. What they've done a really good job of is finding stories that are simultaneously local but can be appreciated and understood internationally. And so I think that's their selling point, I think.
There has been debate over the years about the top 10 feature that we see on Netflix that shows you the top movies or shows that are trending right now. Are these lists real, or are they just serving you what they think you'll consume?
Netflix had famously said, we don't care about ratings, we don't care about popularity, we don't care about the unique location of users. And then in 2020, they added this top 10 metric where you can see what other Australians are watching, and they rank them according to popularity. What I actually did in 2020, 2021 was kind of capture that top 10 list over a year. Every day I took a screenshot of that list and analysed what it was doing. There's some flaws with that metric, in that the way that they even consider a title and to have been watched and to be popular is if it was watched for 2 minutes, which is kind of a bit strange. Can we really consider that a watch? And what I learned over that year was that about 2/3 of the time, the titles in that top 10 list are Netflix originals and titles that are new to the service. So we're really seeing just this kind of this push towards the trending row, towards the new to the service row, and to the Netflix originals row. What that metric is also doing is creating this like hype machine. It's really common to go into Netflix and be overwhelmed, paralyzed by the choice, and just spend longer scrolling trying to find something to watch than actually watching something. So what that metric does is place an element of pressure on the user to go, or simplifies their decision as well, I suppose, to go, Adolescence, everyone's watching that. That's the thing that I need to watch now, even if I'm not really in the mood. It's a thing that I need, that I pay for Netflix for. So I'm really interested in the top 10 feature and what that list is doing to simultaneously streamline the Netflix experience, but stop people from cancelling, which is the whole point of Netflix. They're not trying to sell advertising for the most part, even though they have an ad tier. They're trying to stop subscribers from cancelling.
So since the launch of Netflix, we've seen lots of competitors enter the space. What is the latest in the streaming wars in Australia?
Okay, so just as we kind of celebrated 10 years of Netflix in Australia, a week later, HBO Max arrived, which is pretty exciting. They've been circling for a couple of years. It's great news because this is a huge catalogue and an incredible resource. What it does mean is it's a bit of a problem for Foxtel. Warner Brothers Discovery launching their own streamer will really impact Binge, which Foxtel owns. Foxtel and Binge have long kind of relied on and spruiked their status as the home of HBO, which Warner owns. So from this week, we're seeing a lot of people kind of complaining, where is all the good shows gone on Binge? And Binge over the last month or so has been trying to lock people in with, $4.99 a month for 12 months because they're probably going to experience, if not having already experienced, a mass exodus from Binge. So their future is kind of in question.
Yeah, I noticed that as well this week on Binge. I was one of those people that thought, where are all these shows that I was just watching? They've been taken off the platform completely. So I think it will definitely be something to kind of see if they last, the longevity of it all. But you mentioned there some of the ad subscriptions that we've been seeing these platforms do to, I guess, stay alive or stay in the game. So we're paying for a platform that's distributing ads. Are we getting ripped off by this?
You're paying, but you're still watching ads. So what we've seen in the last 5 years, especially kind of post-COVID, which was this when we saw a huge take-up of streaming services, is that Australians are watching a significant number of platforms. So almost half of us are watching or using more than 5 streaming services. The thing is, when you start stacking subscriptions like that, but these once kind of affordable services become almost as expensive as an old school Foxtel subscription. So in the last couple of years, we've seen with the cost of living crisis, we've seen increased rates of cancellation. We've seen people more willing to kind of cycle through or churn through services. The people that we're speaking to describe it as kind of doing all of Netflix and then cancelling it and then watching all of Stan and then cancelling it, which previously we'd be willing to just kind of subscribe to everything and set and forget. Now people are a lot more kind of active in that churn. We're also seeing an increased rate of people downgrading to cheaper ad tiers. So they're on the rise. What we've found is that what's been reported rather, is that streaming services actually prefer the ad tier. They can make more money out of us than that higher kind of premium ad-free experience. But it does mean that if we're paying $7.99 a month, for example, instead of $25.99 a month, we're still accessing Netflix, but we're getting that disrupted, almost like broadcast experience again.
Yeah, and advertising is a huge thing, and we know that streaming services essentially killed free TV in Australia. Do you think streaming services have helped or hindered Australian-made content though?
So over the last decade, streaming has had a significant impact on the local stories that are being made here. Don't get me wrong, the big streamers like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, and Stan, collectively they spent $225 million in 2023, 2024, that financial year, on 55 commissioned or co-commissioned Australian programs. So they are spending a lot in Australia, but their commitment to the local production sector over the last decade has been pretty lackluster because streaming services are not required to invest here like broadcasters have been. Since 2017, we've had 8 kind of official inquiries that have addressed whether and how digital platforms should be regulated, and yet we've seen no concrete reform. Despite kind of promises from the federal government to introduce legislation last year, that came and went. So we're really kind of waiting to see what will happen, and the production sector is really left in limbo because instead of regulating the streaming services over the last decade, the commercial broadcasters have been saying this isn't fair, like we should be deregulated, and the government has responded to that, which means they're not required as kind of strenuously to produce Australian content anymore. During COVID, the local content quotas for kids content were removed, and we saw an 84% decrease in the amount of Australian kids content that was being made by commercial broadcasters. So the sector is really not just in limbo, but it's in distress. And it's just had an incredibly negative impact on the investment in local kids, documentary and drama in Australia.
So over the next 10 years, what would you like to see change from streaming services in Australia?
Well, it would be great if we could finally narrow down, formalise some kind of expenditure requirement, to say to big streamers like Netflix and Disney Plus, you're making, say, $1 billion in Australia. Can you please spend 10% of that on producing Australian content? And we're really facing a great opportunity here because we've seen titles like, Heartbreak High and Boy Swallows Universe head off out into the world, do so well and make us so proud. These streaming services offer us a great new opportunity to share our stories with the world and that we can be proud of.
Alexa, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you for having me.
That was Dr Alexa Scarlata there, lecturer in digital communication at RMIT. If you liked this ep, you can follow or subscribe us wherever you get your podcasts from. It really does help us keep pumping out the episodes that you love. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search Listener Newsroom. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. We'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon from 3. I'm Helen Smith. See you next time.
listener.